Greetings, Culture Warriors. It is I, Jeff Vieira, author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest Dispatch from the Front. Got a positive story for you today. It's important, if not for my own mental health, for the tender ears of the listeners, that we vary up the tone from time to time. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world today. And a lot of it is pretty negative if you, as I, value freedom and liberty highly, given this oppressive phase that we're going through much of the world under the auspices of the Wuhan virus pandemic. So it's important from time to time to switch it up, to actively seek out more positive stories, and to be able to share them with you, applying our customary lens of culture and values to them. Today, I'm happy to report we have one such story. It is from Business Insider. This is a story by Isabel Cardozo, Fernando Texera, Meg Techman-Fullard, Caitlin Wang. How an entrepreneur from Portugal saved a village's economy by reviving a centuries-old tradition of wool making. The mountain villages in central Portugal have depended on the wool industry since the 19th century. But with manufacturing moving overseas and Portugal's economy beginning to stall in 2000, many of the already struggling factories were pushed to bankruptcy. Now, one wool factory in Portugal is helping revive the local economy while keeping a centuries-old tradition alive. In 2006, Isabel Costa was looking to open a hotel in Montegas, a village in the picturesque Serra da Estrela mountain region. But as she learned about the village's history and economic plight, she ended up also buying the village's old wool factory, one of 11 that once operated there. The idea was to revamp a traditional natural fabric called burrel, B-U-R-E-L, used in Portugal for over 1,000 years. The factory is making use of the same 19th century machines that have been a mainstay in the region, machines that were nearly melted down to be sold as iron before Costa stepped in. The whole logic behind the project was to bring value. Value the fabric, the machines, the art, the people, Costa told Business Insider today. If we didn't do the project back then, all the people who could teach how to use those machines would no longer be alive. The machines are beautiful, but they are only beautiful if they work. Otherwise, it's just a museum. And that abrupt end to the story certainly leaves me wanting to know more. But let's see if we can't fill in the gaps here. Portugal is a place that values tradition. It is a country where things tend to move slowly, where change is not as frequent as in some faster-paced societies. I feel comfortable saying this because I myself am Portuguese. My family came from the Azores originally. And because growing up as I did in Rhode Island, we had a large Portuguese immigrant population, a lot of whom preserved many of the traditions from where they came. It's interesting because in the article they say, look, these factories shut down, went bankrupt around 2000. It is now 2020, and this person has bought the factories and started them producing again using the old equipment. Anyone who's tried to start up an operation will know that one of the largest expenses you have is equipment costs. And you can very easily get in over your head if you, from the get-go, purchase the latest and greatest equipment. It looks great, makes you feel good, but it costs a lot of money, and until you're pulling in that kind of revenue, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Wool manufacturing is no doubt a low-margin industry. So you can't afford that kind of investment, especially on the front end. However, this woman has made the very good decision to simply reuse tried and true equipment that had been used to produce wool for centuries before, and to take advantage of the knowledge of people who in their youth had used that equipment in order to get it up and running again. So clearly, Isabel Costa values innovation as well as tradition. You have to be innovative to think, hey, this stuff's been sitting around for a long time. I bet you we could spruce it up, get it back up and running, and produce Burrell wool again. You know, a lot of people wouldn't even begin to think that that was something possible. Rallying the village around it also takes some amount of innovation, because this is a business that was shut down. It was shut down because it failed. So you have to be able to explain, well, what makes you think it'll succeed this time? And clearly that's something that Ms. Costa has done. I think the larger perspective on this small positive story is that we are too quick as a society, as a civilization, to throw things away that we feel have outlived their usefulness. This applies to that equipment used to produce that wool. It applies to the wool itself. But it also applies to the people. We have lost an appreciation for craftsmanship. When we hit the 1990s and realized that labor had become expensive and transportation cheap, we quite naturally sought the cheapest labor, no matter how far it was away, and destroyed traditions of craftsmanship that had gone back in some cases centuries in the process. Those are hard to rebuild. So now that we've been reawakened via the perfidy of the Chinese government to the notion of political risk, and the fact that even though it may be cheap for some periods of time to transport goods halfway around the world, it may not always be possible. Wars do happen. Trade wars happen even more frequently. So you need to have some capability to produce much of what your society needs within its immediate area, just for safety, if nothing else. But what will you do when you've thrown away the equipment needed to do that? What will you do when you've thrown away the skilled hands needed to do that? Will you be able to import those people on H-1B visas? Well, not likely. Not always. Not in enough quantity. Now, better to take people whose hands are idle and put tools in them. Better to give them the dignity of a job, to give them the economic sustenance of a wage. Better to give them the hope of a brighter future as they get the recompense of their work. And that's something that Isabel Costa understands, and that's something that I would sincerely hope that my fellow Americans would come to understand. Because at the end of the day, cool jobs come and go. But culture is everything. Have a great day.